I woke up in the middle of the night with a strange feeling. It felt like I had become conscious in a painting of the world. I looked over at the digital alarm clock on my bedside table. It read 99:99. That's strange, I thought to myself, and looking over to my open doorway, I noticed a blue light coming down the bedroom hall. I thought that was rather peculiar, and I got up to investigate. Down my bedroom hall, where it intersects with my kitchen hall, the white light that I left on at night was glowing blue. My curiosity wasn't satisfied, and I walked down my bedroom hall towards it. It felt like 5 minutes passed before I reached the kitchen hall, like my bedroom hall had been made impossibly long, and for some reason, at the time, this didn't bother me, almost as if a part of my brain was expecting the walk. At this intersection, normally the kitchen hall leads to the kitchen on the left, and on the right it feeds directly into the living room. But where the hardwood of the living room should have began, I noticed 2 ornate, large, heavy-looking, carved wooden doors. But somehow, like the hallway, this didn't faze me. The right door had a metal door knocker in the shape of a lion's head, and I pulled back on the ring and knocked. I didn't get past the first knock before the door creaked open, as though it were pulled open by a draft. My living room wasn't there, and instead it had been replaced by a great chasm. The walls were made of drywall, and they were painted a beautiful deep green, but I couldn't see the bottom, and the door led to a platform, comfortably wide enough to stand on, carpeted with a deep green, thick shag. I ventured onto it and looked deeper into the abyss. Hanging throughout the chasm were hundreds of bodies, some in body bags, some not, all suspended by chains around their necks, falling out of the eternal above. Suddenly, the carpeted platform dropped out from under me. I gasped and turned towards the door. There was a chain coming through it. It had followed me from my bedroom, and I now realized it had been around my neck the whole time. The horrible sensation of falling dragged on and was only stopped by the chain pulling tight around my neck. I felt it break, and I woke up. My heart was pounding, and my breathing was hard. It was the most vivid dream I had ever had. I was so sure it had been real, despite the glaring inconsistencies. It was Saturday. I just bought this house in a new subdivision, and there was a lot of yard work I wanted to get done. I didn't really like any of the bushes that they'd planted in my yard, especially the ones along the outer wall of the shed, and I spent the better part of the day ripping them out. After ripping out a bush that had sat to the right of the door, I noticed a hole under my shed. I wondered if raccoons or skunks were living under there, but I knew better than to poke my head in and try to find out. After a hard day's work, and as the sun was setting, I sat on the back patio, drinking a beer and admiring the bundles I had created. I then noticed a peculiar distortion from the hole under my shed. It was a pair of glowing yellow eyes. Oh yeah, there's the animal, I thought to myself. What is that, a raccoon or a cat maybe? It was just watching me for a bit, and then it retreated back into its hole, evidently not appreciating the cover I'd removed. I went inside after dark, had a shower, and fell asleep real quickly. I woke up in the middle of the night again, with that same uncomfortable feeling. This time, I had the presence of mind to wonder if it was a dream, and I looked over at the digital clock on my bedside table. The clock read 9999. Aha, so it is a dream, I figured. But then I second-guessed myself. I hadn't actually checked the clock in the morning to see if it was broken in the real world, and that seed of doubt festered away in the back of my mind. Again, I looked towards my open door, and again I noticed the blue glow wafting down the bedroom hallway. I left my bed to follow the light yet again, at least suspecting this time that it was a dream. When I reached the intersection of the hallways, I looked to my right, and sure enough, the heavy, carved wooden doors were still there. Okay, so this is a dream for sure, I tried to convince myself. But just then, the blue light above my head switched off, and I was in pitch black for a moment. Why did this dream feel so real? The cold of the tile against my feet, the feeling of the draft against the back of my neck. The sound of random buzzing in the kitchen and clicking in the walls. A new blue light flicked on, this time in the kitchen. I took a left to follow it. It flicked off, and a light in the dining room flicked on, glowing blue as well. I felt uncomfortable, but intrigued, and I kept telling myself it was a dream as I made my way into the dining room and stood under the light. The dining room light then flicked off as well. Movement caught my eye in the backyard. There were 3 people, dancing around naked between my shed and my house. One of them, my next-door neighbor Alfred, I had just met last week. Susan was there, an old woman from down the block, and Gregory, who shared the back fence with my yard. I couldn't look away. What I was seeing was just too bizarre. They had torches, and they were literally dancing around and dropping to their knees, worshipping my shed, bowing their heads and waving their arms. And in that moment, I noticed a pair of yellow eyes staring from under my shed. I knew I wouldn't be satisfied unless I investigated further. Although uncomfortable, it was only a dream. I walked back out to the kitchen hallway and knocked on the door knocker of the living room. Again, the door flew open easily, but this time, rather than the chasm, my living room was there, just as it should have been. I proceeded through my back door onto the porch, and I was hit with an overwhelming aroma of incense. The smell was rich and intoxicating and sickly. It almost felt as though it casted a spell upon my mind. I made my way off the patio and onto the grass to join my neighbors and get a better sense of what was going on. It felt like my body had a mind of its own, and it was compelling me to explore this further than my mind wanted to. None of my neighbors were rather fit or good-looking, so seeing them in the nude wasn't something I took a lot of joy in, and when I made direct eye contact up close with the yellow-eyed creature under my shed, I felt control of myself lost entirely. Like my neighbors, I dropped to my knees and began worshipping the creature that hid just beyond my gaze. I joined them in harming myself as Gregory presented me with what looked like a ceremonial dagger. I sliced into my palms and the top of my quads and dragged my hands across the grass to smear the blood in lines, radially projecting from the new focal point of my universe, the yellow-eyed creature. One by one, I replaced the bundles of bushes in front of the shed, covering the hole. One by one, my neighbors all turned and walked back to their respective homes, hopping the fences, and I turned and walked back into my house, still lucid and terrified and unable to control my own actions. I kept expecting to be hung as I entered the living room, but I walked right through it with no problems and ended up back in my bed. What felt like some hours later, I woke up and looked over at my alarm clock. 9:37 a.m. it read. Oh, thank God. I felt relieved and lingered in bed for a moment as the calm sunlight poured in. A ghost pain introduced itself in my hands and legs, and I remembered the cutting from last night's nightmare. Hurriedly, I looked down at them, but they looked perfectly healthy. I got out of bed and put some bacon on the stove as I looked out the dining room window at the yard. All the bushes were still tied up in a neat little pile far from the shed, and I felt another wave of relief. Out of curiosity, while eating, I was Googling crazy dreams and the yellow-eyed creature on my phone. I read about Godlings, who are mischievous, childlike creatures who enjoyed toying with the mind as it slept. I figured I must have heard of this creature before somewhere, before having such crazy, vivid nightmares about it, but I couldn't put my finger on where. The dreams had felt so real. I began to feel paranoid about it, and I kept looking out at my shed. The article I read on my phone mentioned that they didn't like the smell of burdock, and it could be used to drive them away. I knew of a field nearby, next to this new development, where there was tons of the stuff. And it was a nice day, so I decided to go for a walk to get some. I had the presence of mind to grab some work gloves out of my shed to deal with the thorns, and I brought back about 2 full plants worth of burdock. I couldn't help but chuckle at myself, going to these ridiculous lengths over a couple scary dreams I had. But I'm old enough to know myself, and I know these types of actions can soothe my anxiety and paranoia, even when I suspected I was just being a little superstitious. I stuffed one of the plants into the hole under my shed. Then I brought the portable fire pit over and burned the second drier plant in front of the shed. There, that ought to do it. I felt content in these pointless actions and smiled at myself as I imagined someone watching me do it and how I might respond in jest. I stepped into the shed to return the work gloves to their rightful shelf, and then stepped back out onto the grass. Looking up, I saw my 3 neighbors standing in front of me, watching me. It took a moment for my mind to register the shock. They were clothed this time, but why were they there? Just staring at me. The grass beneath me disappeared, and I realized there was a chain around my neck emerging from the darkness of the shed. What? I'm awake. This is the daytime. What's going on? But there was no point in pleading. The familiar feeling of falling into the blackness was terrifying enough, only to be halted by that familiar feeling of the chain tightening around my neck. I gasped awake, panting and sitting up in my bed. My legs were killing me and my hands were on fire. I reached for my phone and shone a light on my legs. They were cut deeply, but they had scabbed over. It hurt to even pick up my phone. My palms had the same deep, horizontal, scabbed over cuts. I looked over at my bedside table. The clock read 9999. What? When did I fall asleep again? Has this all been part of the same dream? Then, a giggle from the far side of my bed startled me. There was a naked child with enormous yellow eyes that glowed in the dark, staring at me. In the light of my phone, I could tell that he had blue skin. He must have been the Godling. I screamed and ran out of the room, noticing that there were no blue lights, and I turned to see him prancing after me down the hall, still giggling and calling out in a language I didn't understand. I ran out of my house and down the road in my PJs. My mind raced, trying to understand what was real and what wasn't. I ran to the field to retrieve burdock with my bare hands. They were already cut up, and I had so much adrenaline in my system that I didn't feel the pain. Returning to my house with the plant, I scoured the halls, but found no sign of the Godling. I made my way out back in the darkness, and to my surprise, the bundles of bushes were stacked in front of the hole, as I had done in what I thought was my second-to-last nightmare. I flung them out of the way desperately and stuffed burdock into the hole under my shed. I set it aflame, igniting the shed in the process. I had the deepest fear that I was still dreaming, and that at any moment there would be a chain around my neck and I would be falling. I braced for that inevitability, but it never came. The Godling appeared in the middle of my yard. He giggled again and uttered one more sentence in that language I couldn't understand before prancing away over the fence to my neighbor's yard. I returned to my bed of my own accord and sat up sleepless for the rest of the night, trying to glean more information from my phone. Morning came, and in the time since the incidents, I've developed a theory on what happened. I believe that the first nightmare I had, where I hung in my living room, was the Godling's work. But in real life at that time, my alarm clock was truly broken, as checking it since, it has always read 9999. The next morning, when I awoke and cleared away the bushes, I didn't check on my alarm clock. And I believe that day, the first time I saw the Godling's eyes under my shed, was reality. When I awoke into what I thought was a second dream, I was sleepwalking, and although I had hallucinated some things like those doors in front of my living room and the blue light, I did really cut myself, and I did really move the bushes back in front of the hole. I have no idea whether my neighbors were hallucinations or not, though. I've seen Gregory since, but I haven't had the nerve to ask him. It would be pretty weird to ask if he remembered being naked in my backyard. When I thought I was waking up from the nightmare where I was actually sleepwalking, that was me going back to sleep in my bed and dreaming that it was day. The Godling manipulated the clock to appear fixed as though he realized I was using it as a reality check, and he used my own lucidity as a tool to disturb my sense of reality further. When I woke up in my room with cuts all over me and him sitting at the foot of my bed, that was real. I can't believe that was real. He was just watching me sleep. I don't know what I did to invite this torment, But I guess on the bright side, I think the burdock worked. I haven't seen him in a week. Godlings aren't necessarily supposed to be malevolent, but I have to say, if it does come after you, this is a truly terrifying creature. I still don't understand why he showed me the burdock in Dream. Did he want me to get rid of him? Was it just part of a game? I wouldn't wish this false sense of reality on anyone. I have plans to start therapy next week. I still worry that at any moment I'll start falling and hang. Thanks for listening to this story, guys. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss next week's story. And also tune in at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sunday night for Nightmare Theater, an open book club for nightmares. Until next time, embrace the beautiful dark.